The saints, the elders' information is coming out finally, and it's the bright skinned family bringing it. And I'm glad to say that they are getting past the stereotypes and the witchcraft that's been cast on them. So we're gonna be able to bring this thing all complete circle and bring it together right. Everybody stop hating and start vibrating right, and we might just get Shehikianu instead of Yahoshaphat, because Yahushaphat is judgment. So we want to be on the right side of things, right? Right. Yashalom. Check this out.
As if you've never watched a video on this channel. However, there are more videos on the channel that break down the live history if you wish to see it explained further. This is more of a sequel to the understanding that our entire history is a lie. Many have heard of the theory of Tartaria by now, but in short, the history we are fed in the education systems are a falsity. A lie designed to keep us enslavement through identification crisis. They have taught us to identify ourselves with monkeys, that all human beings originate from Africa, that we evolved through fear and survival, as our consciousness mysteriously forms through some type of physical means. The origin that we are given, of course, is but a random explosion of nothing. They then give us false, soulless history. But many of us know that there's something more. Deep in our subconscious, we know the stories of Atlantis and advanced ancient civilizations. It's a part of our collective memory. We are taught that we had a linear progress of evolution when the truth of the matter is that there have been multiple cataclysms in the past. We know of this too. Everyone knows of the story of the flood. It is the most known story in the world. That kind of trauma would never go away within our psyches. Yet, that would mean that we de-evolved, that we were once great nations who had achieved peace and saw past the boundaries of race ratios. We developed advanced spiritual practices and had truly reached the golden age. Many technologies existed that would be hard for the modern man to imagine possible. In this day, we have lost our sovereignty, our minds, our sense of divinity. We have been fed materialism from our birth. The spirit in many of our people are dwindling, but this is the age of awakening. In the official timeline that they give us, the fall of Rome is 2,000 years ago. It's very difficult in a short segment to fully explain everything, especially the timeline, but the way I would put it is that these ancient architectures that we call Greco-Roman are actually from Atlantis, and Atlantis is likely not 13,000 years ago as Graham Hancock suggests. Remember, he believes that we came from monkeys. Atlantis is of a much more recent time, and what was part of what we now know as America. It's hard to comprehend the nature of this reality, and shocking to realize the drastic measures that have taken place in such a short period of time. Many scholars in the modern day have tried to create a new timeline, such as Fomenko and Isaac Newton. The origin of our modern timeline comes from a man named Scaliger. This is where we get our mainstream timeline, but many debate that this is a falsity created by a specific religious group. This group falsified history in order to make it seem as if they have the most ancient religion. The first hint that we see to this is Origen versus Celsus, in which Origen argues for the antiquity of the Jews. It's obvious out of this piece that Origen is purposely concealing the secret history of the Hyperboreans. Now, another piece of the puzzle that you need to understand is the Phoenicians. Very important. In our administered history, they date the Phoenicians to about 5,000 years ago, but this group is actually of a much more recent time. Earlier, I mentioned to pay attention to the symbol with Hernan Cortez. You will see these types of symbols everywhere, on the only remaining maps, famous characters that we are fed such as Scaliger. This symbol is the secret symbol for the hidden new rulers, the Headless Knight. The Phoenicians dominated from the eastern Mediterranean to the coast of Africa, all the way to Spain and Northern Ireland in mainstream history. The confusing part about all of this is that history mixes the group that survived and took over the world, the Catholic Jesuits, with the ancient races that once existed in these lands. These were mixed cultures. The cultures that existed arose from the two ancient god races, the ancient Hyperboreans and the ancient LaMuuriYAHs. There are obviously more layers to this, so I'll try and explain. The original white people,
Okay, the Hyperboreans are the Berean. They're Yahudayan, Yahudi, LaMuuriYAH, and this young man is getting on it. I'm gonna just let him go ahead and bring forward what he knows and the pieces of meat, and he'll realize that Scripture, and in their case the Bible, that Revelations was 1500. Uh, Jerusalem went down in 1453. It's Constantinople. You know, I know this because of different things where my family's connected. Like I said earlier in another video, Iconium. That's my people, the Conies. So, they didn't stamp you with a different name than your family name. They just didn't stamp you in Hebrew. They put it in English. See, that's the twist there. Because the righteous won. Just keep that in mind. Did nobody come and bomb our planet? Our planet had an infight, but the righteous won on the upper level and decided to let the experiment down here continue on and manifest karma. So, but like I said, we in balance now. We can get the pieces together and we can get on with it.
We have in history, or of the Aryan or ancient Hyperboreans, who were fair-skinned with red and blonde hair. Their homeland is in ancient Hibernia in the far north. For black people, the most ancient depiction comes from ancient Irish legends, the Fomorians, a great civilization of great stature who had grand occult abilities. From Donnelly's Atlantis, quote, "The Fomorians were from Atlantis. They were called Fomorag Afriag, and Fomorag, which has been rendered into English as Fomorians. They possessed ships, and the uniform representation is that they came, as the name Fomorag Afriag indicated, from Africa. But in that day, Africa did not mean the continent of Africa as we now understand it. Major Wilford, in the 8th volume of the Asiatic Researches, has pointed out that Africa comes from Apar, Aphar, Apara, or Aparika, terms used to signify the West, just as we now speak of the Asiatic world as the East. When, therefore, the Fomorians claimed to come from Africa, they simply meant that they came from the West, in other words, from Atlantis. Now, it is said from these ancient legends that the Fomorians were a warlike race, and that they caused great havoc in the world. These are the times when Atlantis was beginning to fall. War was happening constantly. From Donnelly's Atlantis, quote, "The Irish annals speak of the Fomorians as a warlike race, who, according to the annals of Clonmacnoise, were a sept descended from Ham, the son of Noah, and lived in piracy and spoiled other nations, and were in those days very troublesome to the whole world. Were not these the inhabitants of Atlantis who, according to Plato, carried their arms to Egypt and Athens, and whose subsequent destruction had been attributed to divine vengeance invoked by their arrogance and oppressions?" Quote, "The Fomorians were a civilized race. They had a fleet of 60 ships and a strong army. They were basically ancient sea pirates, and some were giants, up to 12 feet tall. They were one of the first explorers of Ireland before the destruction of Atlantis." Quote, "They possessed Ireland from so early a period that by some of the historians, they are spoken of as the aborigines of the country. The first invasion to the country was by the Basque people, or the Atlantis settlements in Spain. Many of you may think that this is fantasy, but this is common knowledge in mainstream history. How many black people today in America know that Ireland is an integral part of their history? Not many. Quote, "The Fomorians defeated Partholon's people, the Basque from Spain, killed Partholon, and drove the invaders out of the country. The next invader to their dominions was Nimhid. He captured one of their fortifications, but it was retaken by the Fomorians under Mort. Nimhid was driven out of the country, and the Atlanteans continued in undisturbed possession of the island, the Fomorians, for 400 years more. Then came the Furbolgs. They conquered the whole island, and divided it into 5 provinces. They held possession of the country for only 37 years, when they were overthrown by the Tuatha De Danann, a people more advanced in civilization. The Tuatha De Danann were the Hyperboreans. They came from what we call the North. Now, there's even more history that we don't know. This is from the timeline where most knowledge was destroyed. All we are left with is our legends. We do have authority on this legend as it is quoted in the Book of Ballymount. So what else do we have? Well, we have legends of ancient Lemuria. the ancestral homeland of black peoples. In H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, quote, "There's a period of a few million of years to cover between the first mindless race and the highly intelligent and intellectual later Lemurians." Now, before we continue, let me just say that I don't agree with her timeline or completely concur with her views on the Theosophical Society. According to the story, she obtained this information from an ancient book that she had access to that is not exposed to the public. Quote, "Madame Blavatsky claimed to have seen a manuscript of the Book of Zion when studying esoteric lore in Tibet. She claimed this and other ancient manuscripts were safeguarded from profane eyes by the initiates of an occult brotherhood. Many of the lands of Lemuria still exist today, such as Australia, New Zealand, Madagascar, and even parts of America, such as California." Quote, "They, the Lemurians, built huge cities of rare earths and metals. They built out of the fires lava vomited, out of the white stone of the mountains marble, and the black stone of the subterranean fires. They cut their own images in their size and likeness and worshipped them." The Lemurians were a spiritual race of black giants. They were a mix of Mongolian and black and had different organs according to Blavatsky. It is said that they had a physical eye on the back of their head, and that this degenerated into the now called third eye, and that they were the grand magicians of the elements. Quote, "This is the reason why perhaps even Easter Island with its wondrous gigantic statues, a speaking witness to a submerged continent with a civilized mankind on it. This is why many aborigines from the lands around the Pacific Ring of Fire are of a dark complexion. The pure blood of black peoples come from this ancestral homeland of Lemuria. The remnants of this land is in California. The old maps show California as an island because Mu went through many stages. It began to merge with the mainland of terra firma as parts of the western coast began to sink. In the occult tradition, root races are basically different versions of the human body, in connection with different ages. The first root race was said to be completely ethereal. The second root race had more physical bodies and spawned in Hyperborea. The third root race, the form that we now truly recognize as human, existed on the lost continent of Lemuria. And the fourth root race developed into Atlantis. According to the occult tradition, this isn't all done simply by sexual reproduction. The first root race, the Polarians, from the central pole of our realm, were completely androgynous beings. This esoteric lore is prevalent through the Hellenes as we hear this from Plato. They had the process of asexual reproduction. This changes as it is said that races can manifest into this reality without budding, but through some type of coming down from above or spirit spawning process. As these races developed from spirit and continued their progress through the ages, everything is being recorded into the Akashic records. This affects the next races to come in the coming ages. There were many colonies of Atlantis. We know of one colony today, such as the Olmecs, was a place where many cultures came and traded. These are the Atlantean races, and I'm not 100% sure how the first two are pronounced, but we have number 1, the Roma-Hab, number 2, the Tlavati, number 3, Toltec, 4, First Turanian, 5, Original Semite, 6, Akkadian, 7, Mongolian. Quote, thus the first Atlantean races born on the Lemurian continent separated from their earliest tribes into the righteous and the unrighteous, into those who worship the one unseen spirit of nature, the ray of which man feels within himself, or the pantheists, and those who offered fanatical worship to the spirits of the earth, the dark cosmic, anthropomorphic powers, Saturn, with whom they made alliance. It is important to remember that sometimes races did overlap and change both in time frames lived or remnants of them survived in the areas occupied. It should also be remembered that in some cases, a catastrophe was anticipated by the priest more in tune with higher energies, and many migrations into lands currently in existence took place before all of Atlantis was submerged. There was intermarrying not only among the subraces of Atlantis, but also with the remains of Lemurian subraces who had escaped before the fiery end of Lemuria. The first subrace, quote, the Romahals were a dark race, their complexion being a sort of mahogany black. Their height in these early days was about 10 or 12 feet, truly a race of giants. But through the centuries, their stature gradually dwindled, as did that of all races in turn, and later on we shall find that they had shrunk to the stature of a bird foos man.
I ain't going to do that to the young man. He's on the search, and I'm gonna post it in as I normally do. If you haven't figured that out, so we good. We are good.